right, welcome folks to the OKD Community Development Meeting for the 25th day of June of 2024. And we have the agenda before us. Please put your name in the attendees section if you haven't already, so that we know that you were here. And we'll jump right into the agenda, and folks can, if there's something missing, feel free to add it there, but I think we're good. So organizing community testing, I kind of want to focus on this today because it seems like that's what the chatter is about in the channel and things happening. So I guess my first question is, I was going to create a page outlining testing nightlies with just like 5 bullet points. Is that what we want to do? Do we want to send people to go to the particular nightly, pull the admin tools, and install like that, and just follow that process for testing nightlies, and then put a discussion item on their findings?
I guess the question is, are we running a test suite as part of the Pro build? Do we have a known level of functionality? I guess we are, because there's been failing. So what are we actually wanting to test? Is it just that we have the community ability to do the install in multiple environments, or is it some level of functionality within the cluster?
I think as far as, well, let me let other people talk. What do you think?
Yeah, I think like some of the things that aren't quite right at the moment. Last I looked, the samples operator comes up with all the Red Hat stuff that's behind the paywall, but I haven't really worried about it too much, because that's presumably easy to fix. But evidently nothing is checking to make sure that there's no Red Hat information in the payload. I think the Prow stuff is testing the normal 50,000 functional tests rather than whether or not the content is appropriate.
Yeah. It runs end-to-end test jobs and some of the basic functionality tests, but there is no tests that make sure that there's not, that the branding's right, or that the right operators, or the right samples and stuff like that.
But I think, Bruce, that's always been a problem. That the test operator has always been broken, same as a lot of the community operators.
Well, no. I mean, the sampled operator has always been fine.
Okay.
And like I regularly use like that's what gives you it pulls in image streams, and that's where I get my SQL, for instance.
Yeah. That's
different from the operators.
Yeah, there was an issue though with the samples had, what was it, about a year ago, the samples had bad URLs for the image streams. And so that there was that little bit there. So do we actually check that, right? So I think that's the question is, okay, is the samples actually getting tested for validity of the images that it points to, right? Are those image streams existing?
I think this is what we want to do. We want to identify a series of tests that we feel are important to the community that aren't covered by the internal tests. Because I think it's the primary one is install. I think that's it. Given the variety of places the community installs, I think that's the first one. Can we get basic installs working where people want to install it? Now, I know some of them may not be supported, so we may have some challenges, but I think that's the first one. Can people follow instructions and get the basic thing running? Then I think there have been areas that are challenging. I mean, I never bother with that, because in my back of my mind, the samples has been broken for me. So I'm interested that it was working at one point, because that's just one of those things. Same with community operators. A lot of the community operators have dependencies on Red Hat licensed operators. So even though they're in the community, they won't install. And the Che one, I forgot what they call it now. Is it OpenShift Live? That's the one that I was playing with for a while. So I know that that one's broken because it requires the dev file, which is linked as the Red Hat one in the community operator catalog that we ship with OKD. So I know there are some broken bits around the operator catalog, and there was Slack message, was it yesterday or today, where someone was actually saying the community operator catalog there was a problem with it.
Yeah, I was actually just trying to find that message. While I do that, Bruce, can you highlight about the secret? Brian, I think you put your finger on something. Bruce, can you reference what you mean about the secret and
Well,
what it
that's
provided?
yeah. So basically, the going way back, the OCP requires a Red Hat available pull secret, which you can get by applying for a free, dev license, and you can't use it commercially, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that hook for the secret is in the code. So after, I guess, some looking at trying to eliminate it, Vadim or Christian, one of them, decided the best way to go was to put in a secret, which was basically a one-liner that's a fake secret, and so the one line is in all of our documentation. It's also, I think, in the frequently asked questions and so on, and that's what we've been using for OKD. So you do have to have a secret, but you definitely do not have to have, and probably well, depending on what you're using it for, perhaps shouldn't use the Red Hat pull secret. So is that all you wanted, Jamie?
Yeah, I think that's good to give people the lay of the land. Yeah.
But but if you look at the I mean, the easiest thing is with what I'm talking about, and I don't think it's a major thing. Okay, so like if we have a place to report actual bugs on the nightlies, I'd be happy to put in a bug thing. It's just that we're pulling the the wrong URL to get the image samples, and so that results in, so normally with the one that is for the SCOS stable, because I've built a lot of SCOS stable ones as well, that works fine. And if you go in and look at the image streams, you'll find that most of them succeed. With the new one, none of the ones that I've looked at succeed because they're all pulling in Red Hat things. So as I say, like that would be a showstopper if you're trying to use it for much, but it's not a showstopper in installing because it installs fine, and it takes a little bit of digging to find out that there was a problem there. Now on the installation things, now normally if there are a lot of different hardware that people might want to install on, then you generally will outsource that to beta testers. Okay, because it's not feasible to have all the hardware operating system combinations in one place.
And I referenced this, later in the meeting notes to talk about that.
Yeah, and I think that would be a reasonable strategy. But you want to have your payload reasonably stable and working, so you need some tests of that in addition to the beta testing. So like generally with beta testers, they won't give you that great test results, and maybe they'll install it so you get a lot of good installation bugs surrounded by a bunch of lousy ones. Okay, but still, but you don't generally get very many bugs that come from intensive use because most random people won't go that far.
Yeah, and I think that actually highlights a question that we might want to ask. Do we want targeted testing, or do we want people using it using OKD in the way that they usually try to use it, and report that back, or both of those. Maybe we should outline that we're looking for both, because ultimately we want to put this in the page, say, what are we looking for, so people sort of know, right? So I guess that would be my question to the group is what do you want to look for in testing? Do you want to look for just the installation for right now, or do you want to look for people's use case testing, or both, or what do we want?
You know, as I say, so far I haven't found any installation problems. If it passes the prowl tests, then it installs perfectly. And I've done that repeatedly in a variety of different situations and so on. So this is not to say that the next one won't blow up horribly, but so far they haven't.
Dennis?
I would think that we want people to test the usage scenario. I mean, definitely want feedback on, you know, things like the branding not being right and stuff that, you know, is obvious that we need to fix. I think the samples stuff is a good, you know, we probably need to get a issue done so that we can fix that. The testing of installs in the way that people use OKD to make sure that, you know, that those cases, I mean, I think that they should work okay, but, you know, it'd be nice to be sure that, you know, the way, you know, people use OKD works. You know, particularly if it's something that's worked in the past and it's not working now, I think we would want to fix that. But yeah, I mean, I think the main things are anything that's, you know, broken for people or is, you know, just not working in the way that we would expect OKD to work. You know, like the differences between the expected differences between how OpenShift works and how OKD works, you know, working as intended, and maybe, you know, what those differences are is not outlined anywhere. And, you know, we may need to do some work to make sure that that is clear on what, you know, what is an expected difference between OKD and you know, OpenShift. And I know I tried to do an install yesterday in AWS and it failed for me, and I really not entirely sure why. Particularly given that the CI does an install in AWS, and, you know, I just ran OpenShift install cluster, create cluster, and kind of accepted the defaults, and it managed to, you know, fail. So that could be a bug, or it could just be I did something weird, or, you know, I'm not entirely sure why that was the case, but I need to dig into that a little bit and see if I can't get it.
Okay,
Work
I'm
out
going to do
why,
an
but-
AWS as well. I was going to do it yesterday, but I'll probably end up doing it later today. I've had some other things.
There was something in Slack. I think it was Slack or in the forum. Differences between Fedora and
Yeah.
SCOS. I think that might be an area that's worth testing, especially, I mean, I think this one was about performance, but I'm aware that if some people have older hardware or different hardware, there may be certain drivers that were in Fedora that are missing in SCOS. So I think hearing things like that could also be useful. I don't know whether we can fix them or not, but just understanding if there are issues around that area, that would be useful just to know, is in terms of the Fedora driver versus the SCOS driver.
Yeah. Who is the community member that was talking about drivers? Are they here with us today and want to chip in to the conversation here? We talked about drivers, it was 2 meetings ago, and we had a community member who was interested in that area. If they're here today, let me see. Oh, I don't see. Okay, so drivers, we know we want that. I'm just, everything that people say, I'm just sort of adding to the list, right? So drivers, So we got samples, community operators, drivers, testing, branding. Do we have a list of the branding locations, the places to check, just so that someone could, I mean, I guess we could just bump into them and look at, but do we have a list? Does anyone know of a list that's like, okay, these are the places where there are images or text of branding anywhere? Probably not. Yeah. Okay. It might be good to generate that eventually, because as we move forward, if we want to change something in the branding, it would be good to know where we would want to insert, you know, the branding change, right? All of the places to hit. So
I mean, I did a bit of work when doing the website and just cleaning up the brand files that we did have with OKD and like the SVGs, and I have a pretty clean copy of all of them, and we have a brand color and stuff like that. So I could add on to that just a brand page with all the assets you could download.
excellent. Andrew, yeah.
I have one question about node images. My understanding, since we are concentrating on SCOS, we eventually we will get the actual link to node images from the build web page, right? Because currently I tried it, I think it's kind of broken, but if you try to restore the URL, it gets us somewhere to Red Hat RHCOS images. I wonder if we have anywhere kind of documented way at least to how to get interim node images before we get the actual like build system in place, like going from Fedora to SCOS.
We don't at this point, Dennis. I don't think we have anything available for people to just grab an SCOS image of the current builds.
There is no SCOS image of the current SCOS builds.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem in the way that the SCOS build pipelines are set up, was that they never produced any images. The CoreOS team is working on setting up, and they tell me that in the next month or so, they're going to have a pipeline that creates SCOS images, and they will be producing them. They're creating a base SCOS. They're going to create for us a base SCOS image and OS container, and we will need to set up a container build that layers on top of the OS tree, you know, the kubelet and the things that we need installed inside of, you know, the CoreOS that we're using. And they're doing the same thing for RCOS, and they'll, you know, the same thing would work for FCOS if we get there, where, you know, there's a defined container that you just build a container in the build pipeline that installs into the OS tree the extra packages. But I think at the moment you just need to use a standard FCOS image, right? And then do the install, and it will pivot from the OS tree that's in the FCOS image to the OS tree that is in the SCOS machine OS content container, and reboot into that. I think the only big gotcha that I know about that is that CentOS Stream currently doesn't have signed secure boot bits, so you have to disable secure boot if you're using an environment that has, you know, secure boot enabled. But, you know, that needs to be clear in the documentation, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I guess you can like using OC, you can actually find out what it's going to do, right? Like which boot image it's going to use initially, which are, you know, FCOS ones at the moment, and as well as what the machine OS is going to pivot to, which at the moment is a mysterious SCOS, you know, 4.16 date sort of image.
It's built in the mass open cloud, in the SCOS pipeline that has been the SCOS pipeline for as long as it's existed.
All right, so I've got an agenda item there
Can I
to
just,
do.
one thing, because I was just going to point out, Jamie, sorry, that that means that Red Hat has pretty much gotten through a lot of the grief to get at least on 417 all these SCOS images for the containers as well as SCOS machine images. And once whichever CoreOS people actually do this in the mainstream version, then we're going to have to go through all of that again with the official SCOS releases, correct?
Not really. It'll just be a substitute out the so at least my understanding of the process, like and Prashant's going to be working on getting pivoting the SCOS that's there to a 417 one and setting up. So the 416s are failing because they're using the same SCOS and there's an incompatibility in the SCOS, but we need to get a correctly set up 416 SCOS pipeline and have the 417 SCOS pipeline using the current bits, like, you know, relabel that to 417. And my understanding is that once the CoreOS team have got everything 100% correct for making the base container, yeah, there'll be a Docker file, a container file we'll need to create that installs the things on top of it, and then it'll just be substituting out the CoreOS bits with, you know, the SCOS that we've got with the newer SCOS produced by the CoreOS team with the you know, the OKD specific layer that sits on top of it. So it's not a huge big refactor or a huge jump. It's a fairly minor change to pivot from one CoreOS to the other.
And then is the plan to go create the install media as well? So if you do the OpenShift install CoreOS, it'll actually then print out the ISO file that you can go use to do the initial node install, like it currently does. Will that get switched as well to an SCOS based ISO, or are we planning just to keep that as the FCOS?
It would be an SCOS based ISO.
Okay.
You know, they're going to be producing the ISO, AMI, and the different things with SCOS in it. I believe it'll be the base, you know, SCOS, you know, CentOS stream based CoreOS, and, you know, then the machine OS content will have the, you know, OKD specific bits and get deployed as part of, you know, the install process. But there will be matching SCOS based ISO and AMIs and things like that. There'll be QCOWs and, you know, all the different deliverable artifacts. They're going to deliver them into mirrors.openshift.com into a namespace there.
Excellent. All right. So on our list here, we've got testing samples, community operators, drivers, look for branding stuff. What other areas of focus do we want? Obviously, we want people to, as Dennis said, test their usage, their use cases. But is there any other areas that we want to focus on that we should put into this document that we would like people to keep a special eye out for?
I mean, is it worth capturing issues that we know about, but we probably haven't documented, like failing community operators, or is that beyond the scope of what we want to do for the moment?
So I was just going to mention that. So I have a script that I wrote, oh man, maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, that grabs the list of installed community operators from like a completed install. I think what we could do is actually create like a template and break it up, and maybe like 3 or 4 of us take, 5 each or whatever, however many there are, and just verify that they work. Does that sound like a reasonable plan that we could do? Okay.
Yeah, because I don't think any of us have ever understood how that community operator gets built, because there are some that's in the operator hub on the public site that don't appear in the community operator. And I've had a question about that in the past. How do we decide who decides, or where is it decided what's in that list?
It is a bit difficult. I mean, operators is something I've spent quite a bit of time on. I think the issue is, so the operator hub, which is included in OKD, is the OpenShift community operators hub, which makes the assumption sometimes that other OpenShift first-party operators are either running or available, or it's running in an OpenShift environment. The trouble with the operator hub IO repository, which I think we now ship by default, is that often assumes it's a vanilla Kubernetes install. And actually, when you go and look into most operators which ship on both OpenShift and Kubernetes, vanilla Kubernetes, they have either build flags or slightly different images and slightly different configurations. And so what you often find is, if you try and install directly from Operator Hub, I'll use a great example of this, Stackgress. That's a total third party. They might be a Red Hat partner, not sure, but they publish into the Red Hat, I think, like the marketplace one. So not a community operator, but they publish into Red Hat Marketplace, and they publish into Operator Hub. Definitely doesn't work if you just try and install it from Operator Hub on an OKD, because it has issues with SCCs and all that kind of stuff, because none of that is included in the vanilla K8s builds of them all. I think, long term, so the OKD Orator project, which someone mentioned, I think, the scope of that is pretty much limited to matching what ships in that first layer OpenShift operators one. So like ODF, AI, Data Hub, all that kind of stuff. We'd look to get OKD builds of that. I think for the replacement of marketplace or community, I think we'd either need to speak to the maintainers of the Red Hat community operators repo and see if there's interest there in collaborating on compatibility. Or, I mean, that would be the best preference. But we'd probably need an additional one because, again, I'll just take Stackgress. There's probably quite a few vendors who ship into Red Hat, the marketplace operator catalog, which wouldn't want to publish into the community catalog if it were to be available on OpenShift. And so we then may need a third catalog of kind of, OKD only community operators. But that's then asking a lot of our vendors, and it's like a distribution, isn't it, of Linux, where you need contributors actually packaging the software and getting it into your repository. But yeah, it's not great. I mean, I have found that installing from the OpenShift community operators gets you more success than installing from operatorhub.io. I think the operatorhub.io probably does us more harm than good in terms of usability, because you think it's a one-click install, and you one-click install and you just get an operator in a bad state, which can be very difficult to debug for someone who's new to it. Yeah, I think compatibility with the OKD operators we should try and maintain, and I think we talked a bit about last time. We'll probably look to track OKD, the OKD iterator operators up to 4 dot or whatever we go as our release version, either 4.16 or 4.17, probably 4.16, because most of those will probably still work on a 4.15 OKD cluster. You know, it's a very much a Red Hat concept that all the operators track with the OpenShift, but unless there's a Kubernetes API upgrade or some other weird compatibility, which there could be, we've often found that you can run a 4.15 operator on a 4.14 cluster, and it will be functional. Might not be perfect, but will be functional.
All right, and Bruce brings up a good point in the chat, which is, can those operators be tested too? Should we add those operators to the testing protocol and encourage folks to test those? Seems like it. Would there be any downside? Can folks think of any downside to having Zed and Owen's work put alongside that for testing? All right, so it sounds like something to add. So I'll add this to the list here. Add link to operators for testing. Is there a separate criteria that we would have for that, or just say install and functionality as expected? Probably the same, right? Because there's so many different operators. I don't think you'd be able to come up with a sort of generalized criteria beyond that, right? Or I'm sure Bruce would suggest removal, right? But yeah, so and for folks that haven't worked a lot with operators, removal has always been an issue in terms of operators removing, you know, your CRDs and all of the other various resources that get created. Operators are not always the best at cleaning up or getting removed.
I think on the removal, we would only want to take action if it was a regression. I'm sure that the current operators, especially the more complex ones like ODF, probably don't clean up perfectly after themselves. But I don't think we'd want that as an action on us. So it's probably an upstream bug. Yeah.
And I think actually you touch on something interesting, which is part of the process, I think, allows us to start not only finding and identifying stuff that's can be fixed for OKD, but identifying stuff that can be fixed in these other projects. And ideally, we get folks submitting bug reports and enhancement requests, feature requests to these other entities for two reasons. Number one, it improves the operators as we use them. And number two, because it builds a relationship between OKD and these operator developers, right? And one thing we don't have is OKD on the roadmaps of very many other entities who are building Kubernetes and cloud native resources. And I think that that's an area where we can definitely grow in. I mean, I don't know what other folks think. Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, one of the things that seemed to disappear over the last year or so was that you know, we used to have a process where people would submit bug reports to the OKD project, and then they would either be, you know, they would be sort of triaged by typically Vadim, and most of them would be converted to discussions, and some of them would be referred to, please submit the, you know, the bug report to, you know, the following Bugzilla location, and so on and so on. But I haven't paid all that much attention. Most of the stuff seems to be coming in as discussions now, even if they seem to be bugs. And you know, Jamie mentioned you know, opening some new process for submitting bugs, and that would be. I think we're about to the point where we can go back to that. As I say, like I've not put the couple of minor issues that I've stumbled across as bugs just because we haven't been doing that. But we, you know, and then we would need, I guess, some text that says, okay, how somebody decides, they have something that is a problem to them. How do they decide what to do with it?
Right. And so this is where I was headed with this, and I was actually going to mention it further down in the meeting is, so what I did is I created just that discussion area and the two labels for pre-release testing, just because I don't know that we want pre-release, and this is just my opinion. Folks should obviously speak up for what they think, but I don't think putting pre-release stuff in the issues section is going to be helpful once we start rolling. Like, I feel like we need those separated out, because otherwise you're gonna get lots of stuff in the issues section, and people trying to triage are gonna be like having to sift through, okay, is this pre-release? Is this something that was already fixed, a pre-release item that was already fixed, etc. So yeah, it made sense to me, but if there's another way we could do this to separate out pre-release, particularly in this sort of nascent stage of, we don't have a release yet, so it made sense to do it as like a separate like discussion section. But I don't know, what do folks think?
I think it would be nice for people to participate in the pre-release part of it, and having a discussion section specific for that is probably good, because it quite possibly will be a little bit noisier, and there's certainly going to be more frequent change and more frequent updates and releases in pre-release. Ultimately, I submitted a pull request earlier to change the frequency of the 417 from possibly every hour, with one build going at a time, and it takes multiple hours. So we're never gonna have 3 or 4 in progress being built at the one time, but we're getting 4 or 5. I did change it to once every 12 hours, so we should get to pre-release 417 builds a day once that gets merged. But that it's much more frequent change than somebody that is trying to use something that is a much more stable, established release that gets updates maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. So I'd expect greater noise and discussion in potentially in the development phase part. So having a space to let the people that don't care about the active development of the next release to allow them to ignore those discussions, and is probably a good thing.
An issue that we talked about, I think last week or the weekend or the week before when you were away, Dennis, is what's happening with the update graph, the Cincinnati system? Because I think an area that quite a lot of people would be interested in testing or having some confidence about is upgrading from an existing one. And I'm thinking people are potentially running systems with a workload on them that are going to have to migrate from, say, the Fedora-based releases into the SCOS releases. And I think it's not probably worth doing that until we have the Cincinnati or whatever the system is graph in place to go from, say, like OKD 414 through 415 into 416 and then into 417. Is there a thought of when that might? I'm guessing we need a 416 there before we can do anything with that. But whenever that comes out, I think that should be a focus. If we can have people sort of go and install, say, a 413 and then try and do an update, an automatic update to a 416, just following that graph to make sure that we've got a good progression there that just works out the box.
Yeah. I was talking to Prashant a little bit about that yesterday, and we were so for the someone that's using SCOS all the way through, that graph, I think, needs to be intact. And an area where we thought that maybe for people going from FCOS to SCOS may need to be a manual step to trigger that particular change, particularly around the secure boot. Like if somebody just automatically followed the graph and they got secure boot enabled, they're going to break entirely, and we know they're going to break entirely because of CentOS's inability to support secure boot. So we were kind of thinking that that particular step probably needs to be a manual. Like we say, this is, the command that you run, OC admin upgrade to the specific thing, because we know that, people are going to have to take at least, if they're using secure boot, they got to take the step to disable, and that's a manual step for everyone to do that. So I mean, we could set up the upgrade and do the work to make that happen automatically, but I think specifically going from the FCOS to SCOS, we probably want people to manually do that step to make sure that they're aware that, I am making this change and taking this path.
I think that makes sense. So everyone would have to get up to, say, a 415 with FCOS, and then do a manual apply or force to go from FCOS to FCOS 415, and then the graph would take them up from there.
Yeah, and we talked about that like two meetings ago, I think, of identifying the releases of 13, 14, and 15 that are like truly functional out of the list of what's available, right, to be able to do that. So that's a task that we need to do, because some of those that came out are not, there were issues and stuff was getting sort of spit out that was not necessarily. Yeah, so Bruce actually has the use of the force flag and explicit upgrade flags. There's examples in the chat there. Bruce, can you copy that into the meeting notes to get that way it's solidified in the meeting notes as to how that goes?
I guess the caveat with that one is the secure boot. We need to capture those instructions and point them somewhere.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a pain point, but unfortunately it's CentOS are working to try to resolve that issue and to be able to support secure boot, but it isn't there today.
But it sounds like, Jamie, we can do the work with the FCOS to get up to that version of 415.
That should all be there today.
Yeah,
the upgrade
so
graphs
probably
should be there today.
So we can probably do that bit of testing to get it to OKD 415 SCOS.
Yeah.
And then we'll wait until the 416 comes out and the update graph is complete to go from 415 to 416 through 417.
Yeah. Yeah, Dennis, I don't know if you were at the meeting where this was mentioned, but some of the stuff that ended up in the graph for OKD before Vadim finished would lead to releases that had some problems. So we want to identify the ones that are not problematic to be sure that they're not just taking latest of 414 to 415 or 415 to whatever. So I just want to be sure. And that's just I mean, do folks agree that that's a good idea, and not assume?
The big gap that's in the upgrade graph right now is that the latest for SCOS stable is 414. And I think that in 4 SCOS next, there is some 415s, and at least it seems that Bruce is very well tested and some others have well tested that most recent one. And I think we probably just need to get that particular one marked as you know, as a 415 for SCOS and stable, and kind of complete that particular part of the upgrade graph tree so that we've got something to go to 416 from.
Any other thoughts or questions on that aspect?
Yeah, I think, well, okay, so like FCOS has this sort of three-stage process that you can go with a version that needs testing to the version that's going to come out next to the stable version. And we sort of have that, although we don't call it that, in that there are the nightlies, and then on the SCOS side, there's SCOS next, and then there's SCOS stable. So we could continue that philosophy, and so the people, and again, the nightlies disappear after, I don't know, 24, 48, 72 hours, whatever it is. I guess the next and the stable ones stay around perpetually. But that would basically we'd have to decide, okay, how does somebody get promoted through those channels? But that would give the community an indication of what they can try depending on their taste for wrestling with difficulties. And presumably the people that are doing anything with the nightlies are going to be brave and scarred. The ones that are less brave or desire less scars will either go with the next or the stable one, depending. Yeah. And that could sort out a lot of the grief from the community, because you have people that are getting a clear message of what they're getting into, for the most part.
Yeah, I think that's good. One of the things that stands out in my mind is, after not being available and all of the stuff that's happened over the past couple of months, the one thing we don't want, my sense is people trying to do stuff and then like hosing their clusters and or getting really frustrated. And so whatever we can do to ease the ride and let folks know what they're getting into, I think, Bruce, you're right. Yeah, that's good. So we have 8 minutes left. I want to be mindful of time, and I also want to cover two other things. We have someone who's joining us, so just before we stop, I want to give them a chance to talk about how they came to find us and areas where they can contribute. But first, I wanted to quickly touch on planting a seed about release cadence. Dennis, has anyone on your side talked at all about like release cadence? Are we looking at sort of the typical, well, I guess it would be up for this community to really decide, right? Like, what do we think is a reasonable release cadence for OKD once, the machine starts kicking out releasable material? Do we want to follow the same as OCP? Do we want to do something quicker? Do we want to do something slower? I just want to start the conversation.
I think that we would want to do 3 releases, like as far as stable like versions, three a year, because that's the way Kubernetes releases, that's the way OpenShift releases. And so I think that from that point we can't really deviate too much. I would certainly like, as we move to a place where OKD actually is the upstream, that an OKD release of 417 should release before OpenShift 417. It shouldn't release at the same time or after. It should be before. And I think 416 is probably going to be an exception in that it probably will be after OpenShift 4.16 is released, most likely. But I think where we have a choice in how we do releases or when we do releases is, and bug fixes and like I know OpenShift particularly early on likes to try to do them weekly. Whether we want to try to do them that frequently or we want to do them at a less, aggressive cycle, I think that's up to the community to decide. Like, what is going to be the trigger point where we say we do a, like a 4.16 bug fix update? Is it bug dependent? Is it, time based? Is it whatever? I think that's where the community can decide, and what is the criteria that, like say for 4.17, what is a criteria that we want to use to say we want to call 4.17 stable? I think that's, up to the community to decide what that is.
That's why I wanted to plant that seed. Brian, yeah.
Yeah, I think for minor releases, we've got to stay in line with OCP because that's where the source code is getting altered. And as Kubernetes API and maybe Red Hat API changes, that usually happens with a minor release. So 4.15 to 4.16. So I think we do have to be, if we ever get to the position where we are the official sort of upstream, I think that's the best place for us to be, where we get the updates. We'll be released, say, a month before OCP or whatever, or 6 months if it's depending, whatever the relationship is. In terms of interim sort of releases, if there are bug fixes that are going to break users, the sooner we have them fixed, the less hassle we give the community. So I'm happy that as long as we have an automated build process and an automated test process that we are fairly happy with, which I think we are with the Prow system, we have confidence in it that it's doing its job, then I don't think there's an issue of releasing as soon as we get the tests passed and there's bug fixes. I don't think if there are no bug fixes, we shouldn't do a release for the sake of a release because we're saying we're going to do a weekly release. But if there's a bug fix that's going to hit a user or a set of users, the sooner we get that in, the sooner that they're not going to have that problem anymore.
Yeah. All right, I want to be mindful of the last few minutes. I just wanted to plant that seed. Maybe we can talk about it more at the next meeting, at the technical meeting. And then I wanted to spend the last few minutes, Sumed, is that how you say it?
Yes, Sumed.
Okay, yeah. You have the floor. Introduce yourself.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sumed Patkar. I just graduated from NC State last month, and I live in Raleigh. And last year I went to the All Things Open conference and got a book about OpenShift. It's written by Michael Elder, Jake Kitchener, and Dr. Brad Topol from IBM, and it got me interested. I'm also reading a book about Kubernetes from the same authors. And at NC State, I had taken a DevOps course and a cloud computing course. So I got interested into these things, and I just read online that OKD is the upstream of the OpenShift. And I wanted to contribute to OKD. I had tried to contribute to Debian package management a few years ago when I was in undergrad back in India. But that package got rejected, unfortunately. But I got to learn a few things. And I'm looking forward to get started on contributing to OKD.
And I think you mentioned Charo sent you this way. Is that right?
Yes, Charo Grover, yes. He
Yeah.
told me to contact you and join the meeting. And
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Charo's,
get a mentor and
yeah.
to help to get started. Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome. We would love to have you. And I think in the channel, we can have conversation and figure out where you can leverage your talents
Sure.
and go through meeting notes and stuff like that. So cool.
All right.
All right. Anyone else have anything else they want to say? We're right at time. All right, I'm going to start dropping the agenda link and reminding folks earlier to add agenda items so that it doesn't seem like it's just me talking and creating the entire agenda. So I'll probably drop it like the day before or maybe way earlier in the morning so that folks feel like they're, you know, adding to the agenda and whatever, and it's not just me. So. All right, this video I will put up. I will have the time to put it up today, so expect that this video will get up. And from now on, we'll start putting the videos up. I think we're at a place where it makes sense to start communicating out with the videos again.
And Jamie, just a point of at the beginning, you mentioned your new situation. Is that going to break our meeting because this is an account by unit?
I don't think so. I think that I am an alumni of the university, and so my sense is that I'm still here, and I'm technically still an employee of the university for a year, although I'm kind of like in a weird state. So I will verify that. Actually, I was thinking about that before the meeting. I will verify if that's the case. If I find out that we will have to move, that's fine. I've got another account that we can use for this, so, and I'll let folks know. So fear not, we will always have well, we will for the foreseeable future have a Zoom account to use.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. All right, folks, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next week. See you in the channel.
See you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Have a good week.